The necessity of the Royal Arch degree to the Master Mason. The system of Masonic degrees, as now practiced, is the product of an evolution. Prior to 1717, there is no record that Freemasonry consisted of more than one degree. The symbolism, the beautiful lectures, the ornate diction, with which we find it clothed today, represent the growth and development from the crude and transitional stage of past centuries. Strictly speaking, there was no degree from the dawn of Freemasonry until it began to take on the speculative feature. Before the speculative era, the initiate, or apprentice, was sworn in on the book to observe certain charges, now known as the Ancient Charges and Regulations. This constituted the whole ceremony, with perhaps a recital of the various legends of the craft, portions of which are retained to this day. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's presentation, From the Quarries, an archive of Masonic lore. More light for the information and instruction of inquiring Freemasons. The Necessity of the Royal Arch to the Master Mason by William F. Kuhn, 1921. The Mason, prior to the revival of 1717, was designated as an apprentice, fellowcraft, or master, not because of any special ceremony or degree work, but on account of the length of time of service and skill manifested in his handicraft. The Ancient Charges and Regulations, as read to the apprentices, referred to the duties they owed to each other, to the lodge and the Holy Church. It is even doubted by some of our best Masonic historians that a grip and password were connected with these ancient ceremonies. Ancient craft masonry, from its earliest legendary history, around 625 AD, down to 1740, made no pretensions to philosophical speculations. No latter-day wise men existed to convert the simple tools of the operative craftsman into a philosophical fog bank. Near the middle of the 18th century, some other than mere operatives were admitted into the guilds or lodges, and men were elected to preside over brethren who were not skilled in the implements of the craft. The introduction of the speculative mason prepared the way for the dawn of Freemasonry. The so-called revival of 1717 was but the bursting forth of the evolutionary forces that had been slowly developing for half a century. These same forces are at work today, so it can truly be said that Freemasonry is a progressive science. Masonic historians are agreed that sometime between 1723 and 1730, the second and third degrees were evolved, and in this evolution of degrees, ritualism and symbolism were developed, resulting in the intellectual and philosophical Freemasonry of today. The central idea of the entire system of Freemasonry became the loss and recovery of the Word, symbolizing death and the resurrection, the ending of the present and the beginning of the future life. The student of Freemasonry must admit that the Word is the central point around which the entire system of Masonic symbolism must revolve. Its possession is the consummation of all Masonic knowledge. When lost, its recovery is the soul's object of symbolic labour. Mackey says, "No event in the history of speculative Freemasonry had so important an influence upon its development as a system of symbolism as the invention of the Royal Arch degree and its introduction into Masonic ritual." The Royal Arch stands as the rainbow of promise in the ritual. It stands as the promise of the resurrection, of that which was lost and that which shall be recovered. The question arises as to whether the Master's word was originally communicated in the third degree. On this point, there is some diversity of opinion. In our present ritual of the third degree, the Master's word is lost. Dr. Oliver, a noted Masonic historian, says, "The true word was never lost, but transferred to the Royal Arch." And in corroboration of this statement further says, "I have before me an old French engraving of the groundwork of the Master's Lodge, dated in 1740, containing the usual emblems, and on the coffin is the true word in Roman capitals." Brother Newton R. Parvin, Grand Secretary and Librarian of the Grand Lodge of Iowa, in a letter to the right, says, "We have in the library an old ritual manuscript of 1740, which was stated to be used by Brethren of Ben Jonson. Head Lodge number 194. The original manuscript belonged to George Oliver, and it includes in the third degree the Master's Word. This makes about 60 pages of closely written matter. It begins with a long historical introduction. Many points are quite similar to our present methods. The language is very simple and impressive. This would tend to prove that before the legend of Hiram Abiff was introduced into the Master's degree, the true word was communicated in the Master's degree and not a substitute word. It necessarily followed that when the legend of Hiram became a part of the ritual of this degree, the loss of the word followed, as the loss is part of the Hiramic legend. But the loss without a recovery would be an absurdity. To complete the symbolism of Freemasonry, the word must be recovered, hence the necessity for a fourth degree, the Royal Arch. In 1738 or earlier, the story of the loss of the word and the new legend, the Royal Arch, were gradually introduced into the lodges, and when the division occurred in 1751, dividing the Freemasonry of England into the moderns and ancients, the latter organised a Grand Lodge and adopted a ritual of 4 degrees, the fourth being the Royal Arch. The Grand Lodge of Moderns evidently continued to use the old ritual without the legend of Hiram Abiff, while the Grand Lodge of the Ancients used the new ritual containing the Hiramic legend and the fourth degree, until the year 1813, when the two Grand Lodges united and formed the present Grand Lodge of England, known as the United Grand Lodge of England. It is therefore to the Grand Lodge of Ancients that we owe the Master's degree as found in our ritual, and also the preservation of the Royal Arch degree. One of the articles of union of the two Grand Lodges of England in 1813 was the retention of the degrees as formulated by the Grand Lodge of Ancients. Hence, among the articles of agreement of this union, we find the only declaration made anywhere or at any time as to what constitutes ancient craft masonry. This article declares that ancient craft masonry shall consist of the degrees of entered apprentice, fellow craft, and master mason, together with the Holy Royal Arch. We see, therefore, that the Royal Arch is merely the evolution of a truth contained in the early third degree. It is not a higher degree, but the last volume of a series in a sublime story revealed through symbolism. The Master's degree without the Royal Arch is a story half told, a song half sung, and a promise unfulfilled. The candidate is promised that he should receive, but is put off with a substitute. He is left in darkness, in doubt, and, to the thoughtful one, in a condition of disappointment. Yet, there is a purpose behind this seeming deception. Light and revealed truth comes only through toil and willing service. This lesson must be learned before any Mason is qualified to know and to appreciate this truth, the Master's Word. It is, possibly, unfortunate that the Royal Arch degree was separated from the Blue degrees, but whether fortunate or unfortunate, the Royal Arch stands as the last of the degrees in ancient craft masonry. It is the summit, and no Master Mason is in possession of all that Freemasonry teaches without the Royal Arch. The series of 4 degrees continued to be conferred under a lodge charter until about 1750, in America at least. Such, in brief, is the history of the Royal Arch degree. Its parentage is as legitimate as any of the degrees of ancient craft masonry. It sprang from the introduction of speculative Freemasonry into operative Masonry, the fruit of symbolism and allegory. To be a master mason is the highest and most honourable degree that any man can attain. It entitles him to all the rights and privileges of the craft. All the accumulated, so-called degrees do not add anything to his Masonic stature. The Royal Arch is a part of the master's degree, the summit of its excellency. It is the privilege, and should be the duty of master masons, to complete the Masonic story, told in allegory and revealed in symbolism, by receiving the Royal Arch. For more Masonic podcasts, videos, music, texts and artwork, visit fromthequarries.com or subscribe to our YouTube, Twitter and Facebook accounts by searching From the Quarries.